In considering the question of your belief that you have control or at least significant influence on your own destiny, we're going to look at three key elements. We're going to first talk about control in the context of entrepreneurial mindset. We're going to deconstruct that term into two pieces. We're going to talk about autonomy first, and then we'll transition in the locus of control and how that influences the success of the entrepreneur. We'll also discuss how to assess your personal control and your personal locus of control. So, for definitions, with autonomy, we're looking at freedom. And freedom in the context of freedom from the influence of others. So that would mean that in decisions you make, and in significant decisions that you may solicit advice and counsel and consider other inputs. But when it comes down to it, the number one influencer and the number one decision maker on the decision is going to be you, and you individually. And you can act on your decision and what you think is right with relative independence or freedom from the influence of others. The second element we're going to talk about with control is a locus of control. Locus of control is a different side of control that looks at the individual's belief that they can influence others or that they can influence the environment. So when we dig into that, we'll recognize that when good things happen, do you attribute that to what you did or to what happened externally? Or inversely, when bad things happen, do you take accountability for that? Do you take control of that situation, or do you attribute that to others? So, in part one, we'll look at the need for autonomy. With autonomy, one way to think about this in context is to look at a job. Is a job for you economic security? Is it comfortable? Is it a source of satisfaction? Inversely, is it economic slavery? Does it prohibit you from reaching your ultimate goals? Is it constraining? Is it futile? And is entrepreneurship a way to tackle that and a way to free yourself from that? Well, in my experience, this idea of total autonomy and total freedom of the entrepreneur is somewhat of a fallacy. Your old bosses are replaced. If you start your own company, you may not have a boss in a traditional sense, but you may have customers and partners and investors that have a certain level of expectation or demand or influence that you need to be accountable to. Your 9 to 5 is now a 24/7. And your work week, well, it may have been traditional. It may have been a Monday through Friday. As an entrepreneur, particularly in the early days of the venture, it's much more fluid. There are long days, there are short days, there are pieces of days that are segmented over that 24-hour period that if you don't do the work, it doesn't get done. And while the element of how to do that, you certainly have a lot of influence and flexibility on deciding the level of freedom or being able to do whatever you want, whenever you want, and still be delivering value to customers, partners, and investors is somewhat inconsistent. So let's take a look at a typical day of an entrepreneur and a typical day of what you might could expect. So when we look at day in the life, this is something that was initially sourced from a Inc. 500 survey of how CEOs spend their time. But what I find is this is very similar to how entrepreneurs spend their time as the CEOs of their ventures. So they are early to rise on average. They may work at the beginning of the day for an hour or so. They may then have a commute. They may drive to work, but even during that driving, that training, that subway, whatever their form of transportation is, over half of them are doing work during that commute. As safe and as it allows. There is some meeting time, and that might be meeting with your team if you're already at the point of having a small team, or it might be meeting with customers or prospective partners or investors. There's also a level of talking individually to customers and understanding customers that may take an hour or two a day. From there, there's a mix of activity of communicating with other partners and colleagues, some activity of phone or really selling the concept, some aspect of emailing, and you see here emailing alone approximately 2 hours a day. Lunch breaks are taken by approximately a third. Others kind of work as they can, eat as they can on the go. You'll notice then that there's a bit of a break. So at this point, this might be that 5 o'clock point that traditionally individuals may be used to stopping. And we see time for exercise. We see a few hours of family time. We see a return to work after dinner and some relaxation time there as well. An average bedtime of 10:30 based on that wake-in time of around 6:30. So hopefully what this illustrates is that as an entrepreneur, it's a busy day and it can be a long day, but there can still be time for family and friends and other engagement, and that the element of working 24 hours a day is not necessarily there, but it's also very different than a standard tight 9-to-5 schedule. So the element of complete autonomy and complete freedom, while a bit of a fallacy, does deliver the opportunity to be flexible and to be dynamic and to do some things on times that suit you, how you want them done, and typically and increasingly where you want them done. So the second element of what we'll talk about is locus of control. Here we're discussing the sources of influence. It comes in two fashions. There's an internal orientation. Locus of control that's internally oriented means that you believe as an individual that you are in control and are able to influence your environment and the outcomes. Inversely, externally oriented means that you're feeling subject to people and events, that you have minimal influence, that you attribute fate or luck or other external factors to what caused certain things to happen. What we see when we look at entrepreneurs and we study control and we study the locus of control is individuals that have higher levels of internal locus of control drive entrepreneurial opportunity discovery and action at a much higher rate. And so with that, we find that when you believe you have some measure of influence and you can make something happen, even if the economy or the government or competitors are not necessarily in your favor, you have a greater likelihood of bringing about entrepreneurial change than those that believe they are subject to an external locus of control. So the element of can you create your own destiny is in large part based on your belief of having this internal locus of control and influence. And so to look at an individual that has done this multiple times, consider yourself of thinking about starting a payment processing company and battling tremendous competitors, tremendous global competitors, but yet you think you have something different and you think you can change the way that people do commerce. Also think about all of the automotive companies that have been around in a nearly 100-year history. Tremendous players, tremendous global players, many Fortune 500 companies. But you believe you have a new way. You believe you have a new thing that can fundamentally change the technology and fundamentally change the way the dealership model and the overall driving and customer experience, as well as the environmental impact of automotives can be. And that individual, Elon Musk, did that initially with PayPal as a co-founder of PayPal, and then moved on to found Tesla. And Tesla we'll talk about a little bit later in the course, but they are a leading electric vehicle company. He's done well with that, albeit has faced some challenges and has faced some risk along the way that we'll talk about as well. So in summary, beliefs about the value of entrepreneurial opportunities are driven by the individual. The idea of can you take action on that concept? Can you make that idea a reality is in large part based on how you operate, and how you operate in the sense of how independently you operate. And do you believe that you have the ability to successfully pursue that opportunity? And that's where this element of autonomy and locus of control come to bear and play a large part in your ability to execute on these beliefs. It also depends on the degree to which you believe that you can influence others, that you can influence the environment, and that you can influence the circumstances that are out there. So when you go through and you do the self-assessment, we're going to look specifically at locus of control, but we'll continue to revisit some of these themes later in the module.